All right, so hello 325. How are you guys? Uh, there are two video lectures here for this particular section, which is Module 8. And this is probably the second you're watching, although you can watch them in any order. I teach this class on site, as I've said many times, and one of the things that's become clear to me is that many of you don't have a clear idea of a structure. So attached to this video is a beat sheet, and you can use this as an example of a beat sheet, although it's a beat sheet for a single scene, in fact. But it gives you a set of beats in a scene. This isn't normally in a feature film outline, this would be a single scene, so therefore it would be just one beat, really, in an outline, one scene in an outline. But in this case, this is almost like a one-act play, so it's 20 minutes long. This is for the short called Whiplash. I'm going to send you a link. There'll be a link attached to this short. It's about 19 minutes long. You need to watch it. It was what the Whiplash movie was sold on. This short was entered at Sundance. It won, and the guy garnered financing for his feature from doing this short. Having said that, it is a brilliant example of screenwriting, and it is so you will see attached to this a beat sheet describing what you will see very precisely. But the point of this is to go through all the key plot points. Okay, so or all the structural elements. That's what I'm trying to get. This lecture is about structural elements. And while all of you theoretically have been taught this before, my experience has been you have, at best, an amorphous grasp of it, yet it's crucial. A structure is what you hang your story on. In other words, an audience comes into a movie with certain expectations of how the story is going to be told. And those expectations have to do with the structure. So the structure is a way in which you make the story dramatically work against the audience expectations. When people come to see a movie, they expect to see a certain thing. Now, there are people some directors who violate these structures, but they're rare. It's like Terrence Malick. Experimental films violate these structures, but generally, as a storytelling form, you're going to use the structure I'm about to lay out for you very specifically, and you can look at, and we will, at features, and we will look at where these structural beats are, and they will all be there right where they're supposed to be. So the vast majority of features, now by that I don't mean 75%, I mean 99% are structured this way, if they're successful, okay? So I'm going to take you through this. So the key step is you really got to watch Whiplash at this point to get this lecture. So there'll be a link, but you can always type in Whiplash Short, WHIPLASH Short to YouTube, and generally you can find it, okay? So I will send a link that's current, but I've discovered that these links disappear periodically, and so you may need to find it yourself, but I will find one that's working currently. Now, what are the structural elements? Basically, there are a number. There are, first, the inciting incident, the world, the hook, the core statement, the first plot point, the midpoint twist, the second plot point, the climax, the payoff, and the resolution. There are 10 structural things that you've got to keep in mind. Okay? So as I talk through Whiplash, I'm going to describe what each of these is, and it'll be clearer to you what's going on. All right? And all of these are marked. Each of them are marked and where I think they happen in this short on the beat sheet. So in other words, there's the short, you'll watch it, then you'll take the beat sheet, and you'll listen to this lecture and you'll sort of get what I'm getting at, okay? Now, in the first act, you're always going to have these key, or no, I'm sorry, let me put that another way. By the end of the first act, and the first act of a feature-length screenplay is between 20 and 30 pages long, and it's generally going to be around 20 scenes, okay? So by the end of the first act, you will have had the inciting incident, you will have established the world, we'll understand the hook, we will know what the kind of core question is, the core statement, and the first plot point will take place. Now, the really important ones here are the inciting incident and the first plot point. And the first plot point definitionally ends the first act. Once the first plot point takes place, we're no longer in the first act. So if you have a scene in which the first plot point takes place, Act 1 is over. There are no more scenes in Act 1 after the first plot point. There cannot be. It's definitional. All right? So I get lots of submissions. People put first plot point and then they end the act 3 scenes later. That's just plain wrong. Can't be done. So, if we look at Whiplash, the truth is, the inciting incident took place before the movie started. That's not unusual for a short film. Having said that, on a feature film, the inciting incident usually takes place by page 10, i.e. 10 minutes in. Right? The key issue is that the inciting incident is generally something that happens to the protagonist of the film. And it isn't an action they take. They may take an action as the result of the inciting incident. But in this case, Neiman, who is the lead character in Whiplash, was invited to join this jazz band. And he has chosen to proceed to do so. So in other words, he's been recommended in some way and he's decided to try out for this band. And he's going to try to make this band, right? Play in them. So that's kind of where that's. So that's the inciting incident. In this particular case, it takes place before the film begins. But in most of your feature films, it will take place. Something will happen to the protagonist, which in a sense opens up the possibility of the story. It leads into it. This always happens. You can point to an inciting incident in every single film. And it generally happens to the protagonist. Now that's a key point. You've probably heard me talk about this. Protagonists must be active. In this particular case, in the inciting incident, the protagonist can be passive. All right. So we continue down this movie. Boom, boom, boom. Neiman is sitting in this empty room. He looks at the drum set. We see a picture of Gene Krupa on the wall, etc. Other musicians, all male, although somebody pointed out there was a woman in this room, although I've never noticed her before, enter the room, all young men like him. The drummer enters and tells Neiman to tune up to B flat and turn pages. Neiman asks the pianist to give him a B flat, which he does apparently reluctantly. Neiman tunes the drum kit skillfully. By now, we understand the hook. Will Neiman make the band? He wants to make the band. That's what his want is as a character. Remember want? 3 dimensions of want. And we also understand the world. The world has been established. We're in a practice room of a jazz orchestra filled with young, talented musicians who await their instructor. So we are in the world of jazz and very high-end, talented young musicians. That's where we are. So will Neiman make the band is the hook, and the world has been established. We're in a practice room of jazz players. Okay, so then the next bit is the drummer switches onto the kit, and then a horn player says, "Milk the cunt." All right, right away, the world is turned up. This is an incredible thing for somebody to say. He just means tune the instruments. But the idea that such abusive dialogue is tolerated in this room implies that, sorry, somebody's calling me, implies that we're in an abusive place. It's a first signal that something's really wrong here, okay? Exactly at 9 a.m., a black-clothed man, Fletcher, silently enters and removes black jacket to reveal a well-muscled chest and a black t-shirt. No kidding. Here's the antagonist. We get it, right? Here's the antagonist. He's clearly threatening, and the boys are afraid. Fletcher intros Neiman. Fletcher conducts band in Whiplash. Neiman struggles to turn the page, but wow, we know right away that these kids can play. This is not easy to play. It's like awe-inspiring. Holy crap, can they play, right? Fletcher stops them, accuses somebody of being out of tune, and then he does this whole thing where he berates Metz and basically abuses him and then fires him. Now, this is the core statement. The movie is about an examination of abuse and how it's applied and survived. So beyond simply will Neiman make the band, now we're in a place where what will Neiman do about this abuse, which we're beginning to see here in several ways, and will he pursue this gig? Fletcher then reveals after Metz leaves that he wasn't out of tune, and then immediately the stakes go up. And he announces a break. Fletcher announces a break, and then sees Neiman will play. The squeaker will play when they return. So this is an interesting beat, because what's going on here, in my opinion, is the first plot point in this story. And the plot point is always a decision that the protagonist makes. And by making that decision, they're going to enter into conflict with the antagonist. In this case, and it's perfectly acceptable that it be this kind of decision, Neiman doesn't run away. He's already got lots of evidence that this guy Fletcher is fantastically mean, but we also know that Neiman is fantastically driven by this point. He wants to be in this band, and he chooses to not run away. Okay? That's the end of Act 1. No more scenes after that are in Act 1. Act 2 begins with Fletcher speaking to Neiman in a very friendly way, and he learns a little bit about him, etc. And Act 2 is always where the conflict slowly increases. And this short is a master class in how the screws of the conflict are slowly increased and calibrated exactly to go up a little bit at a time. It is a master class. As somebody said in class the other day, this thing is perfect, and it is. So it starts off very slowly. It actually, Fletcher seems friendly. Seems like, hey. So Fletcher starts Whiplash again, and initially Neiman does well. Fletcher seems to be grooving, and Neiman gets confident. Then Fletcher stops the band and begins to berate Neiman for not playing at his tempo and hitting the right downbeats. He says that Neiman is rushing. And then Fletcher says he's dragging. The band plays again. Fletcher turns away listening and throws a chair at Neiman. Fletcher berates Neiman, challenging him whether he was rushing or dragging. Neiman can't answer, right? Fletcher approaches Neiman in a rush. In other words, he increases the conflict. He gets right in Neiman's space, right? Suddenly, it's not just this guy throwing a chair at you. It's somebody who's right here who might hit you, okay? And then Fletcher does hit Neiman. He begins to slap him on every four and demands to know whether he, Fletcher, is rushing or dragging. In my opinion, this is the midpoint twist. Suddenly, the addition of physical abuse is shocking and unexpected. Fletcher actually hits his students, and this puts Neiman even further at a disadvantage. Neiman's world is beginning to twist and disintegrate in front of his idea. So, midpoint twist at this point. Now, this is somewhat subjective. This is my opinion on where this is. Fletcher demands that Neiman count at 104. He does, but Fletcher wants him to play it on the drums. Finally, Fletcher gets Neiman to admit that he was rushing. Fletcher notices Neiman's tear and lays into him for crying. Now we're getting into not just simply, can you do the task, but are you worthy as a human being? He challenges him to say, I am not upset so loudly that the whole band can hear him. And Neiman shouts it repeatedly until But Fletcher is unsatisfied, and he lays into Neiman with the personal information he garnered during the break, totally raising the stakes to intense personal abuse. It's not just what's inside you, it's what's inside you, Neiman, that is useless and horrible, and your family sucks too. This is the Act 2 plot point. Neiman doesn't run, but simply is broken. Now, this is a short film, and in a weird way, the antagonist wins in this short. So, but generally, this is the plot point where Neiman would choose to confront Fletcher. But in this case, because it's a short and just the opening of the film, that's not what happens. But we could still look at this as the Act 2 plot point. Neiman essentially breaks a Neiman, and the climax is when Neiman screams, "Ah!" to Fletcher's satisfaction. And then Fletcher replaces Neiman with the original drummer and starts Whiplash again. And the payoff, another plot point, is Neiman still in the band and resolution ripe for more abuse. So again, the climax, we've got the Act 2 plot point where he basically, Fletcher basically destroys Neiman emotionally, humiliates him utterly, but Neiman, despite this, chooses not to run. That's the protagonist's decision. He simply chooses to be broken, but he does not run, i.e., he's going to, in a sense, he's going to stay for more. Finally, Neiman screams. That's the climax to Fletcher's satisfaction, and then Fletcher replaces Neiman with the original drummer, start Whiplash again. Payoff, Neiman's still in the band as the backup drummer, and resolution, he's going to stay for more abuse. Those are your 10 plot points here. As you work on your projects, I'm going to be looking for you to be able to identify all these plot points and in your project. And I'm going to be asking you about them. The key point is inciting incident that happens to the protagonist. Plot point 1, where the protagonist takes an action, or in this case, didn't take an action, but chooses something, right? Chooses something. It's an active choice. Neiman chooses to remain in the room after he's about to be, he's got to know that he's about to be abused or he's at risk for abuse. He chooses to remain in the room. And then the next key one is the midpoint twist. This will move around. You won't get this right away. In other words, you won't be sure what it is at this point. The second plot point, that is where the protagonist chooses to confront the antagonist. And generally in a feature film, it is where their arc ties up. They have to change. They have to grow. Their need has to fulfill their flaw at this point. If they're arrogant, they're going to ask for help. If they're shy, they're going to suddenly break out of their shell. So to confront the antagonist, to do that they must do. And then finally, the climax is where the antagonist and the protagonist go at it, whatever that is. And then you have the payoff, which is where all the other plots are paid off, including the A plot. And then the resolution, what's going to happen after the film? Where are they all going? So that's structure. And that's the deal. Okay, thank you.